idea of the Christian imagination and why we needed to cultivate a Christian imagination. And I realized we don't like to think very often anymore, and especially when it comes to matters like poetry. But we do like things like movies and that aspect of art. But you're taking us into this journey, as you say, imagination in the kingdom of God, kind of reimagining what we understand about who God is, how he's working in the world. Why is that important right now?
Yeah. So of course you can, I mean, the first thing to say is that I've spent a lot of time and, attention and prayer thinking about how the imagination works and why we can trust it and how it relates to the gospel, because somebody should do that, and I happen to be the guy that's doing it. But you don't have to do all of that in order to enjoy and be blessed by a great piece of art. The thing itself is doing its work and blessing you, and every time you go back into that art or that painting or that music or that poem, it'll have a little bit more to offer, and that's a beautiful thing. But Christians in particular, I'm writing the way I am partly because historically, from the Reformation onwards, among some of the Protestant churches, there has been a distrust or a mistrust of the imagination and the arts, which is partly actually a kind of almost, it's an almost accidental byproduct of a separate discussion about images and idolatry. And the whole discussion about statues of saints and all of that stuff. I mean, that was a proper discussion to have, and there may have been some places and some conditions in which people were worshipping sticks and stones when they should have been worshipping the Lord. That may, I mean, that's a separate discussion, but that was a proper discussion that was being had, right? But somehow the kind of spillover from that, instead of just suspecting a situation where a person didn't understand that a statue was a representation and that the reality was beyond the statue, the kind of discussion Paul had it, in Athens in Acts 17, where it says, "He whom you worship without knowing I preach," i.e. you're really already on to the beginnings of God, but he doesn't live in statues. That kind of discussion spilt over into a general suspicion on the part of Protestants in general and Calvinists in particular of all the imaginative and creative arts. And yet the imaginative and creative arts have been used historically by the church and obviously throughout the scriptures beautifully to glorify God. So I'll just turn that phone off. So I felt that at this point, when we kind of need to get rid of a little bit of our historical baggage, to be honest, I felt that the time had come, and I'm not the only person, lots of other people, Jeremy Begbie and Paul Fidesz and all kinds of writers in the last 20 or 30 years have said, can we, as fairly thoroughgoing Orthodox Christians, I'm a Trinitarian and I believe that the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ really happened and makes all the difference in the world, okay? Yeah. Those of us who are in that sense fully, believing Christians, who think there is a place for the arts and who thinks there's been a false divorce between reason and imagination and a false split and a kind of dissing of the arts as though they were only private, subjective and possibly dangerous things, that we need to defend them, and we need to defend them in fully, thoroughly thought through, philosophically sound Orthodox Christian terms. Now, I do, and there's a bit of me that I do that in academic books as well, like Faith, Hope and Poetry. I kind of do that so you don't have to, but you can rely on the fact that somebody's done that thinking. But when I wrote Lifting the Veil, I decided to take the core of what I was saying there and try and make it available particularly to Christian artists or to pastors who have artists in their church, to try and give a good theological grounding to a proper Christian use of a baptized imagination. That's really what I'm trying to do in that book. And I'm trying to inspire and encourage a rising generation of creatives, as you call them in America. It's extraordinary American habit of taking adjectives like creative and turning them into nouns unnecessarily. Anyway, let us use the term creatives. I realize they're all out there. Some of them, Christian artists are in a very difficult position because on the one hand, they can be in churches that suspect them because they don't know what the arts are or what to make of them. And historically, they've got this baggage about images and idols and all that sort of nonsense. So they're kind of on the edge in their church. And then when they go into the world, the wonderful, bohemian avant-garde world of artists, they're totally on the edge there because they're Christians.
Mhm.
And everybody else is, some kind of, anarcho-nihilist, So these poor people are actually in a place in between. Now, actually, as it happens, that's a brilliantly creative place to be. And from that place, they can both renew the church and convert the pagan artists if they do it right. And that's what, great artists, visual artists like Makoto Fujimura, for example, and his whole idea of culture care and so on, that's where all that is coming from. That's where a journal like Image is coming from. It's trying to support the artist who is, as it were, trapped between two margins, but actually also in this beautiful place between two margins where great change and creativity can happen. And I hope my book, Lifting the Veil, is a contribution to that.